So in this video, we're going to be breaking down a realistic wish list for the FX3 Mark II. All these things here are actually, I feel like, well within reason about what to expect for the next generation of this camera. So if you're new here, I'm a DP based here in LA. I shoot a lot of commercial, fashion, and social media content. So if you're into that kind of stuff, definitely stick around for the upcoming content because we got a lot of videos queued up for the coming weeks. And this list is in no particular order, but the first thing on my list is going to be to shoot in 6K. I think 6K, between 6K and 8K, 6K is going to be the perfect sweet spot for future-proofing this camera. I feel like the 4K image out of the FX3 and FX6 look really nice, but I do feel like when you're delving into the range of like cropping for social media or cropping for like lookbook stuff or e-commerce, any kind of like stuff where you have to crop into that 4K image, it definitely degrades very, very quickly. So I think that 6K will definitely help overall, and then just improving the overall look of your image. A lot of people are going to be very controversial about this topic, but then I do think that sooner than later, 4K is going to be a standard for 9x16 delivery, and that's just not going to be possible with these cameras as of right now. And if you're going to be talking about everything else in terms of the camera market, I think that Sony is the only company in the past 3 years that has released a 4K only camera, which is the FX2 or the A7 V. So those only shoot at 4K, while every other camera manufacturer shoots at a high resolution. Is that a big deal? Honestly, no at this point, but I feel like for the second iteration of this camera, it's a no-brainer. It should have some kind of higher spec resolution sensor. That's my opinion, but I definitely think it'll help overall and just improving the overall look. The next thing on my wish list is going to be having a bigger screen. After using the Nikon ZR for the past 3 months, it's honestly a game changer, man. It's something you got to really appreciate by using it first to see how nice it is to have this kind of a bright screen on the body itself on your camera. It is a little bit cumbersome to like when you have ports and stuff like that plugged into the camera, but that's why I also want it to be a tilt flip screen. So like how the A7 V is, where it also tilts out and then it can also flip out. So pretty much you don't have to worry about the monitor swinging out to hit anything plugged into your camera. That should also be a standard on every single camera because it's honestly really nice. But on to the next one, the fixing the overheating issues with the FX3. The FX3 definitely has a very good reputation overall, but I know a lot of people, myself included, have had overheating issues over the course of the few years. It's definitely not as stable as, like, let's say something like an FX6, where it's going to be like any kind of terrain you throw at it. I have had my overheating issues, and sometimes when it overheats, it will not say it's overheating, and then it won't autofocus or whatever. So if you use the camera extensively to that kind of point, which I have, you're going to notice that there is overheating issues. They got to fix that in the next version of this camera. Not that big of a deal for most people, but definitely that's something that should be fixed in the Mark II. Okay, so the next one is definitely a little bit controversial. I do think that they should add open gate to the FX3 Mark II and the FX6 Mark II. Not a deal breaker like how some people would make it to be, but it definitely would be a nice feature overall to have for anamorphic options, you know, and also just for vertical horizontal crop. I feel like a lot of people say that, but it's not a deal breaker for me, but I wish it did have that, it had the option to do it. I'd rather have the option and not need it than need it and not have it, kind of thing, because a lot of us nowadays are shooting for social media at the same time. We're shooting 16:9 and 9:16 and 1:1, 4:5, all those different aspect ratios. I feel like having more real estate that you're on your camera sensor is a no-brainer. I definitely don't see a reason for them to not include it as opposed to include it. But again, I'm not making it a bigger deal than it has to be. It's not something that I really want, but it'd be nice to have, kind of thing. Okay, so this next thing is actually a pretty big deal for me. I've had a lot of issues with this, but I want to be able to turn off noise reduction completely, especially if you're blending in two different cameras like the FX3 and the FX6. In some low light situations where, like, let's say you're expecting to like put noise reduction in post, it can't really match one-to-one all the time because you cannot fully turn off noise reduction on the FX3 like how it is on the FX6. I definitely think that this should be changed because honestly, the in-camera noise reduction is a little sloppy at times, especially at that higher base ISO. Not that big of an issue, but then I have had some instances in which I'm trying to blend in footage from an FX6 and FX3 in a fairly dimmer situation, and it's harder to match the textures just because it already has noise reduction in certain parts of the shadows. Again, not that big of a deal, but I feel like in a pro cinema line camera this is like marketed towards, it should be an option to turn off noise reduction. That's definitely something on my list that I found notable. The next thing on the list is going to be to have the FX2 EVF. I know a lot of people think that that camera is very controversial just because of the sensor, and who wants that EVF? I personally would love to have that kind of EVF on my Nikon ZR. I definitely love having EVS overall in terms of when I'm operating a camera. So I feel like a tilt EVF like how it is on the FX2 would be insane on a high resolution FX3. It'd be like perfect to shoot BTS stills on a job, or just shooting stills in general, or just like seeing your framing in a easier environment than on your smaller screen. Definitely would like to have that in my next version of the FX3, but again, that might not make it through since it did have a lot of backlash for the FX2, but we'll see how that goes. Okay, so the next one is definitely a big one for me. I wish that all Sony cameras had this, but the FX3 Mark II should have better exposure tools in general for video. If it's a cinema camera, it doesn't have proper exposure tools like EL zone or false color or waveforms. I feel like that's just a no-brainer at this point, especially if you're marketing this towards like pro cinema users and stuff like that, and a lot of like camera houses are picking this up to be a regular camera. You need those tools to monitor your exposure, as opposed to like, well, you don't need those tools, but most professionals I feel like use either waveforms or false color, EL zone, those kind of things. People don't really rely on zebras and histogram alone. It's definitely possible to do, but I feel like a lot of people that I do know, they rely on those specific tools: false color, EL zone, waveforms. Those things should for sure be added in a future version of this camera, and all Sony cameras to begin with. I mean, it's not that big of a deal to just put some kind of false color or like a waveform, for goodness sake. But definitely something that I wish the FX3 Mark II had. Okay, so the last thing that the FX3 Mark II should have is better IBIS. I feel like the IBIS in this camera isn't as good as it could be. Not a lot of cameras do it really right, but I feel like if they look at Lumix and Panasonic, stuff like that, with the S1, S1 II, stuff like that, dude, those cameras, if you've ever operated one of those, it's almost like you're having a handheld gimbal all the time kind of thing. It's not always perfect, you know, it is very robotic in some ways, but I definitely do think that it is really nice to have better IBIS, especially in a small body like this. That is also not a deal breaker, but I feel like at this point, the IBIS should be getting better with these cameras, just like the image quality and the features and the reliability. But yeah, this is my wish list for an FX3 Mark II. I feel like all these things are very, very feasible and achievable for Sony to do in a Mark II of this camera. But what do you guys think, man? Did I miss anything that you guys thought of for an FX3 Mark II? What am I missing? Let me know down below. But I'll catch you guys in the next one. Later.